Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste, assalamu alaikum. The new moon, which marks the end of Ramadan, is expected to be seen in the Western Hemisphere tonight. To our Muslim brothers and sisters elsewhere in the world, Eid Mubarak on this joyous day of Eid al-Fitr. Ladies and gentlemen, we have another reason to celebrate. This is the 100th edition of our Zoom public meeting. It is an historic event indeed, because it's a landmark that has never been accomplished before. For 99 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday. For the past 2 years, we have featured over 305 presenters from all parts of the world speaking on 99 topics. We sincerely thank all of you who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing pan-Indo-Caribbean and pan-Indian diaspora project. We have 2 chairpersons tonight because it's a long program. Bindu Devkinath Maharaj of Trinidad and Tobago will chair the first segment, and later Janine Gilhari of Belize will chair the second segment. Janine is a young businesswoman who has her own fashion brand called House of Gilhari. And Bindu has been an educator for the past 26 years and is a published creative writer. Bindu, welcome. Please chair the meeting.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahaber, for that warm welcome, as usual. It is always my pleasure to be here. So good night, everyone. Good morning and good evening. Namaste and assalamu alaikum to all of you, depending on the time zone in which you live, because there are always people here in this meeting from all over the world. Eid al-Fitr is a celebration by Muslims worldwide, marking the end of the month of fasting during Ramadan. Our Muslim brothers and sisters expect to celebrate Eid tomorrow. Ravan will be playing a music video to commemorate this occasion. Ravan?
किस्मत में मेरी चैन से जीना लिख दे, डूबे न कभी मेरा सफीना लिख दे। जन्नत भी गवारा है मगर मेरे लिए कातिबे तकदीर मदीना लिख दे। ताजदारे हरम ताजदारे हरम हो निगाहे करम, ताजदारे हरम हो निगाहे करम। हम गरीबों के दिल भी संवर जाएंगे, हम ये बेकसां क्या कहेगा जहां, हम ये बेकसां क्या कहेगा जहां। आपके दर से खाली अगर जाएंगे, ताजदारे हरम ताजदारे हरम कोई अपना नहीं गम के मारे हैं हम कोई अपना नहीं गम के मारे हैं हम आपके दर पे फरियाद लाए हैं हम हो निगाहे करम वरना चौखट पे हम हो निगाहे करम वरना चौखट पे हम आपका नाम ले लेके मर जाएंगे ताजदारे हरम ताजदारे हरम
Atif Aslam's melodious voice has brought us blessings for this historic 100th edition of our Zoom program today. Ladies and gentlemen, today, Sunday, May 1st, also marks the beginning of Indian History Month in many countries in the Indian diaspora. Now, on the flip side, Sunday, May 1st also marks the 1964 Winsma ethnic cleansing atrocity in Guyana, when about 3,000 minority ethnic Indo-Guyanese in the mining district of Wisma were targeted and terrorized, some murdered, others beaten, women and girls raped, and all chased out of their homes that were set on fire. May their souls rest in peace. Such is the nature of history and time. Good and bad collide, and they are memorable and will not be forgotten. Now, ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, which is a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. And like today, we often partner with the Amina Gafur Institute for the study of indentureship and its legacies, led by our very own Professor David Dabadine. Now, for the first time today, our program is being supported by the Sport and Culture Fund of the Office of the Prime Minister of the Government of Trinidad and Tobago. This too is historic and worthy of celebration. For us who come from Trinidad, we know how momentous this sponsorship is to mark this milestone. Our moderator this evening / tonight is once again Shalima Mohammed, a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Shalima obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. She's a very strong advocate for health and wellness practices based on traditional and alternative healing. Ms. Mohammed, welcome. Please take over from here.
Thank you so much, Bindu. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Namaste, and a very, very warm welcome to all of you. We are especially pleased that you all could join us today for this very, very momentous occasion. Our public meeting today will take the form of a panel discussion, as is normal, in addition to a celebration of the 100th edition of our Zoom program. So if it's not already muted, kindly mute your microphone unless you have to speak. The microphone icon or symbol is at the lower left corner of your screen. The background noise, as we know, can be distracting, and we would want to avoid that. Today's meeting may be a little over 2 hours long. And one of the main reasons is because we are celebrating early intellectuals in the diaspora. We will be paying tribute to intellectuals and activists who were scholars, writers, and speakers, both publicly and in academia. In another Zoom program, we plan to recognize literary icons, scientists, politicians, trade unionists, sports personalities, and others separately. Why are we choosing this particular topic? It is the ICC's informed view that even where Indians are the majority population in the diaspora, they and their views are often marginal or marginalized in the mainstream media and informal discourses, as well as in public groups, organizations, and institutions. The Bocas Literary Festival, taking place right now in Trinidad and Tobago, is a classic example of Indo-Caribbean novelists, poets, playwrights, performers, and writers being marginalized. This platform tries to fill that gap by placing them in the spotlight. We have quite a packed program today. It is divided into two segments: the academic presentations first and the commemoration of our 100th anniversary secondly. We begin our presentations today with Dr. Vijay Maraj, who will speak about Sir Vidya NAIPAUL of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Maraj is a lecturer in literary, cultural, and communication studies at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine. She obtained her PhD in literatures in English. Dr. Maraj, welcome. Please present for 5 minutes.
So V.S. NAIPAUL is a son of the soil of Trinidad and Tobago, the only Nobel Prize winner that this nation state can claim, and the winner of numerous other literary prizes. His beginnings in Trinidad and Tobago were the result of what he himself called the unlikely event of people from the Indian subcontinent being transported to the Caribbean as if by magic and being deposited in circumstances of which many could make little sense, placed as they were at the bottom of extremely hierarchical societies in positions that were no better than those experienced by the now ex-enslaved. So they were placed in these extremely hierarchical societies in positions that were no better than those experienced by the now ex-enslaved. This is what had happened to V.S. NAIPAUL's grandparents. We can therefore celebrate his accomplishments without hesitation, because to make the journey from these beginnings to become a Nobel Prize winner seems even more magical, albeit of a different kind, because he had to learn to look dispassionately at numerous ideological tensions that still keep us imprisoned globally up to today. And he had to learn to pick his way through this minefield that they represent and come out alive and victorious. Next slide, please. Initially, those ideological tensions involved those that were associated with the inevitable creolization of the indented laborers that the indented laborers experience. This often involved shame and rejection of many aspects of the selfhood that had defined their forefathers. One of the most famous of these is V.S. NAIPAUL's own father's obvious attempts to fit into Trinidad's Creole society and his entanglement with the worshippers of the mother goddess herself. And that's why I wanted the music to be playing throughout, because that is the mother's music. Next slide, please. So this is Persad NAIPAUL, and you can see his attempts to become part of Trinidad's Creole society. Next slide. Later, V.S. NAIPAUL would travel the world. And as he traveled through Kampala, he observes the effects of colonialism in the terrible conflict between indigenous religion on the one hand and between new religions on the other. And he calls what he sees an applied and contagious illness, curing nothing, giving no final answers, fighting wrong battles, narrowing the mind. Next slide. Confused and seeking answers desperately to these conundrums, he moves beyond these two formidable foes when further travels lead him to formulate a document called Our Universal Civilization. This essay has become rather controversial because many have taken the civilization he describes to mean that he is talking about Western civilization as it exists now. But this document can be read instead as a manifesto for a new enlightenment, one in which we take all the disparate parts of our experiences and make a whole of it, one in which we work out clear values by which to conduct our affairs, and one in which human life is sacrosanct. Next slide. On a personal note, therefore, I would like to end by saying, who knows, what were the effects of the sacrifice that Persad NAIPAUL had to perform, because it seems that what we beg of the Mother Goddess were given in abundance to his descendants. Such are the roots of those who had to run from home to avoid the heel of the oppressor. And in V.S. NAIPAUL's case, we can see towards what we can run. Therefore, we celebrate his life and what he left behind for us for all time, his writing. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about my favorite subject.
Dr. Maraj, thank you so much for sharing. We apologize again for the music, but our audience really wanted to hear what you had to say, and it was quite profound.
No problem.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Professor Brinsley Samaru. He is a living legend, an international icon for all of us researchers to admire and to honor. And of course, it is only fitting that he speak today. Professor Samaru will be speaking about F.E.M. HOSEIN of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Samaru is a Professor Emeritus of History at the University of the West Indies. He is a former senator, minister, and member of parliament in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome, Dr. Samaru. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Yeah, that's a picture of the subject of my brief lecture. That is Honorable F.E.M. HOSEIN. That is him here with R.J. Nanku, the first president of the East Indian National Congress. Next one. Right, so this is a summary of his life. Born in Bonnier Estate, Aruca, won college exhibition from Arima Boys High School, won coveted island scholarship. He was the first person of Indian origin to ever win an island scholarship in Trinidad and Tobago. First degree BA honors from St. John's College in Oxford, History, English, and Government. And then he becomes a lawyer. He's called to the bar. Could you go to the next slide? 1908. Right, elected to the Arima Borough Council in 1928, mayor from 1929 to 31. And then 1928 to 33, while he was still the mayor of Arima, he's elected to be a representative of the Legislative Council. And for Trinidadian, you would understand the enormity of his constituency, from Diego Martin, St. Anne's, Tacarigua, Arima, Blanchisseuse, and San Rafael. Today, that area is divided into at least 6 constituencies. And here you have one person in charge of such a long, such a vast area. Next slide, please. Right, the right to fire the rocket, which symbolized the opening of the celebrations of the First Peoples. And this is the book, the poem that he wrote in 1931. I believe it's 1931, Arima and the Saints, which is a passion play depicting the brave resistance of all First People to Spanish conquest. It represents a revival of such names in Trinidad as Oropuna, Waima, Anacona, Anapuyo, Chanaruma. And then, of course, as that reading shows, he restored that canon, even though he was not of the First Peoples, he was of East Indian origin, and yet he had tremendous sympathy and empathy for them. Next one. Right, and among his major achievements, now, so far as I am concerned, his major achievement was in 1931, when he completed the roadway to the marooned settlement of Blanchisseuse, linking the citizens to Arima. Now, before that time, the people who lived in Blanchisseuse had to bring their cocoa and coffee and bananas and other things to be sold in the market at Arima through mountain roads. So they had to leave Blanchisseuse at around 5 o'clock in the morning with all their donkeys and mules and so on, and they would reach Arima at around 10, 11. Now, he was so thoughtful that he secured the roadway, which even today, from that time to today, links the maroon settlement of Blanchisseuse to the major center of ARIMA. 1909 to 1936, an advocate of sugar workers, who again are not in the ARIMA area, but these are mainly in Central and South Trinidad. And he, spent so many years in fighting the various causes of East Indian sugar workers, getting better conditions, getting higher wages, and so on. He was an active member of the East Indian National Congress and of the East Indian National Association, preparing briefs for the legislation of cremation, which finally came about in 1952, the recognition of Hindu and Muslim marriages, and the establishment and the enablement of East Indian participation in the electoral process. Next, last slide. And here I have included some of the things he said. You ought therefore to feel proud to belong to a race to which the world is so deeply indebted, a civilization equal to, and those who built and established the Grecian and Roman empires. And I have the source there. I am making no distinction between Indians and others. Just as they cannot do without us, so we cannot do without them. And we all have to live together happily to promote the best interests of this colony. A section where I speak about his act as an active advocate of sugar workers and cane farmers. I am equally thankful to Columbus for having discovered Trinidad, and to the sugar planter who brought my parents from India and permitted me to be born here. But both have served their time, and it is time for the sugar manufacturer to go. So these are the comments that I would initially make on an icon who is much neglected when we talk about the history of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'll be quite prepared to answer further questions because I've done a lot of work on F.E.M. HOSEIN, and I can answer a number of questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samaru, and I hope we really do have some questions for you. I know that you have so much more to say. We appreciate it. It is now my pleasure to introduce Ms. Naima Khan, who will speak about H.P. Singh, again of Trinidad and Tobago. Naima is a researcher and a lifelong learner in natural healing, holistic medicine, and metaphysical studies. She began her business in beauty and health at the age of 17. Welcome, Naima. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Shalima, and good afternoon and evening to everyone. Can I have the first thank you? My presentation is on Harry Persad Singh, otherwise known as H.P. Singh. Can I have the next slide, please? On February the 5th, 1905, of indentured clearance on a sugar estate in Princestown. He received his early education at Princestown CMI Primary School and attended Naparima College for a very brief period. Singh was primarily a self-educated man who built upon the foundation achieved at the primary school level. Singh was committed to championing Indian causes and defending the rights of Indians against discrimination and injustice. His life was very much part of the struggle in Indian nationalism, and one which was selflessly genuine. He devoted his life to self-improvement and self-reliance of the Indian community. His efforts were generally social, cultural, religion, and welfare in orientation. He was particularly concerned about the high level of illiteracy of Indians in Trinidad, the deplorable housing conditions of the laboring class, and the aged, the destitute, and the orphans. Every effort was made to improve their conditions and relieve their distress. His plight was political in the sense that there was strong support for Indian independence and for self-government in Trinidad. As a young man, Singh left his birthplace in Princestown to live and work in Port of Spain. It was in Port of Spain that he met his wife, Carmen Gopal. In Port of Spain, he also came into contact with many influential Indians who supported and gave him ideas. These interactions helped him blossom into the activist he would later become. At an early age, Singh became proficient in tailoring and business. He was employed as a tailor with Stephen Todd and Fogarty on Frederick Street. Being an ambitious young man, he soon established his own tailoring shop on Frederick Street. And this trade he pursued into his 70s. H.P. Singh was also an enterprising businessman, as he was able to purchase several prime properties in Port of Spain. Can I have the next slide, please? Singh belonged to clubs that defended the rights of Indians in Trinidad. One such organization was the Observer, where he became the editor in 1946. This was a monthly journal of Indian opinion that was edited solely for 24 years by Singh. He was also associated with the India Club, and the two objectives of this club was to encourage the intellectual pursuit and cultural advancement of members of the Indian community in Trinidad. The second was to promote the diffusion of knowledge of India and things Indian. Singh founded and was the leader of the Indian Association of Trinidad and Tobago in the 1860s. This was an influential Indian organization. After retiring in his 70s, Singh began writing letters and articles to the press. But more importantly, he began and completed a monumental account of his major work on the history of Indians in Trinidad. This manuscript is entitled The Indians in Trinidad, Struggle for Justice, 1845 to 1978. H.P. Singh is most deserving of the title Father of Indian Nationalism in Trinidad. He was a tireless warrior for the creation of a fair, just, and equal society, a Trinidad where all races could live in peace and harmony. He is truly a national hero, though unsung so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Naima.
Thank you.
Our fourth presenter is no stranger to this platform. Dr. Curti Algo will be speaking about Dr. Jean Hansdave Aden of Suriname. Dr. Algo is a young graduate of Anton University of Suriname, where she works as a researcher in the Institute for Graduate Studies and Research. She obtained her PhD in 2017, having done her dissertation on interreligious relations in Suriname and Guyana. Curti, so nice to have you here again. I hope 5 minutes will be sufficient.
Thank you, Shalima. Thank you, everyone, Dr. Kumar, for this opportunity to present on Dr. Jan Adin. Let me start by saying that Jan Adin is one of the most influential thinkers in Suriname, and his writings are still relevant. Now we see on screen a picture of him, and while he has done a lot for our East Indian community, I will shed light only on a few topics. Next slide, please. Let me first say that he is very popular. His writings are very popular in the academia. He has earned various academic degrees. But what is most important to me, I think, in the current era is his contribution when it comes to managing our culturally diverse society. And what were the discourse, the narratives, the policy views to manage those nation during the time of decolonization. Now, what is very important about Jan Adin is that he proclaimed an idea we would call unity and diversity. It is based on the Vedic philosophy, where he was basically saying that everyone has to keep his or her own cultural identity, while at the bottom must strive to pursue unity between each other. Yes, as I said before, his contribution to the political views, but also the social views about managing our nation was very important. Let me give you a brief background about his parents. He was born in 1927. His father and mother were Ram Adin and Daulatya Ujagi, respectively, and both of them were actually indentured labor workers. His father, he was born in 1876 in India, and he traveled to Guyana. So hello, my friends in Guyana. We have links. He came to Guyana at the age of 14 as an indentured laborer. His mother was born in 1892, and she came here as a toddler. Jan was the seventh child of his marriage. Next, please. In 1947, while he had achieved various milestones, he married to Etwaria Devi Nandalal. We can see a picture here. Next. And as I said, he is one of our influential thinkers, and his writings were not only popular for the East Indian community, but to the larger nation as well. What is so interesting about his intellectual legacy is that from a very young age, he was very talented, and there are so many things about him. People say he was so bright that he was allowed to skip the first grade. At the age of 16, he was already an assistant teacher. At the age of 20, he was the youngest teacher, head of primary school at that time. And he was also one of the first Surinamese people to leave for India in 1952 on a scholarship, where he obtained his Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and Comparative Linguistics. Now, as I said in the beginning, he obtained various academic degrees, and after his scholarship in India, he went to the Netherlands for further study with his family. And you can see on this slide the number of degrees he obtained in the Netherlands, especially at the University of Amsterdam and Utrecht. Master's degree in non-Western social sciences, philosophy, cultural anthropology, and not to forget Master of Law. And I will tell you why Master of Law was so important. He was among the few people who advocated in the Hindu and Muslim marriage law. Next, please. And another thing he promoted was the use of Sernami as a language equal to that of the Sranantongo, which was the lingua franca in our country. To come back to what I said earlier, one of this most influential productions, his works, was his idea of unity and diversity. Actually, it is still used today to emphasize the intercultural relations in Suriname. And would I have the quote for Vedic? Oh, it's from the Rig Veda. Excuse my spelling if I don't pronounce it very well. It's from the Rig Veda. Anikta me ekta. Anikta me ekta. He derives the unity and diversity from the principle of the Rig Veda, which is called Anikta me ekta. And yes, he by outlining that, actually he wrote an essay about it, and it won the first prize in the 1950s on the 10th anniversary of the Cultural Center of Suriname. And it has been so popular in our political circles and political views for the past years. Yes, this is a picture to illustrate the unity and diversity principle. Now, my last few words on him. In addition to his intellectual engagement, he was very influential in political circles. Jan Adin has been member of parliament for more than 10 times. I think it was 70 times he has been member of parliament. He has been very influential in the largest in East Indian political party, the VHP. And you can see a picture here where he is with the political leader Jagannath Lakshman in 1960s. He has also been Minister And here again, a picture with Jagannath Lachman. Yes, and as I said, there are so many things to say about him, and he has not only been influential in local circles, but also in regional and international communities. You can see here a list, you know, from Brazil, Oslo. You have he has written a lot of magazines and contributions in various journals in Suriname, as well as outside Suriname. I think that was the last, if I'm not correct, this is the last slide. Next, this is the last. Yeah, this is a very good, very beautiful picture. To finish my presentation, he has left a very important legacy for political Suriname, but also for the East Indian community. And one thing I'm really proud of is that a non-East Indian scholar wrote a thesis, a master thesis about him. His name is Albert Duncan Albert Sohn a few years ago, and he said, you know, we must encourage our people, and Yana Dean was one of the most important suggestions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Kirti. That was quite enlightening, and I wish we already had time to hear more. Unfortunately, hopefully we can bring you back another time. So thank you once more. Ladies and gentlemen, our next presenter is Dr. Maria Khalidin, and she will be paying tribute to BECHU of Guyana. Dr. Khalidin is an Associate Fellow at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies at the University of London. She is also an editor at the Amina Ghafoor Institute, which is a co-host of today's program. Welcome, Dr. Khalidin. Can you please keep it to 5 minutes?
Thank you so much. In 1894, a Bengali man in his 30s named BECHU arrived in Guyana as an indentured labourer to plantation and more. Deemed unfit for plantation work, he was assigned instead to work in the deputy manager's house. If you could kindly go to the next slide, please. In 1896, motivated by the uprising on plantation Nonpareil and the murder of 5 Indian labourers by the police, BECHU wrote what would become the first of many letters to the Daily Chronicle. These letters came to form the start of a campaign by BECHU to challenge the ills of the indenture system through the colony's press. BECHU's activism was constantly attacked by the plantocracy and resulted in him being acquitted for libel twice. However, he received support, significant support from the emerging Indian Guyanese middle class, and in 1897, his indentureship was actually commuted. In the same year, he was called to testify at the Royal Commission on Depression in the Sugar Industry in the West Indian colonies, sometimes referred to as the Norman Commission. If you could kindly go to the next slide, please. BECHU spent such a short time in Guyana. He left the colony in 1901, and my own research suggests that he went to Fiji after. But his contribution was significant, and I want to tell you why. The most important thing that BECHU did was galvanize the Indian middle class in Guyana in support of indentured workers. And this was the first time that we can really see that this happened in the indenture period. Additionally, he exposed the sexual exploitation of Indian women by the planting class. He publicly advocated for the rights of indentured children in his testimony for the Royal Commission. And finally, he could be credited with initiating the tradition that emerged following his departure of Indians on and off the plantations, writing to the colonial press to self-advocate. If I could kindly ask you just to go to the next slide, please. BECHU's most important function for me, but this is a personal view, was to totally upend the colonists' perception of who an indentured labourer was. This is really beautifully encapsulated in the following excerpt from a letter by a colonist to the Daily Chronicle, from which this talk takes its title. Sir, who is BECHU? Is he really an indentured immigrant? If BECHU is a real live indentured labourer, it strikes me that he has had the agent in Calcutta on toast. He is far better educated than most of us are, at all events, in some respects. But what the dickens has he come here for? Thank you very, very much for taking the time to listen to what I had to say about BECHU. It's such an important figure in the history of indenture in Guyana. Thank you so much. I'd be grateful if you could just note the suggestions at the end of my talk for further engagement in BECHU's story. And these include a very magisterial monograph by Clem Seecharan on BECHU, Professor Clem Seecharan, and a wonderful monologue performed by the actor Tanmay Dhanania and written by the British Indian Guyanese writer Ellie Nyland, who brought BECHU to life via screenplay for a recent event that I did with the Commonwealth Writers. So while we don't have, there's no photo on record of BECHU, it's a lovely opportunity if you use the link there and I can pop it in the chat as well, to see how a contemporary Indian Guyanese writer imagined BECHU and how an actor brought him to life. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening.
Thank you, Maria. I absolutely enjoyed reading Professor Clem Seecharan's book on him. I have to read it again, and I would recommend to anyone who hasn't read it, please do so.
Absolutely.
It was an absolute enlightenment for me to even realize that someone came. Anyways, this is not about us. Thank you so much. We move on very quickly to Professor Betaram Ramharak, who will honor the memory of Joseph and Peter Rahman of Guyana. Dr. Ramharak is an adjunct associate professor of political science at Nassau Community College in New York. He is the author of the biographies on Balram Singh Rai and Jung Bahadur Singh of Guyana. Welcome, sir. Please present for 5 minutes.
Namaskar. If I can just add a footnote to your previous speaker. Actually, BECHU's official name, which we know from Odin Ishmael's study, was Boshunath Chattopadhyay. So that's the name we know is on record. And I think in your ad, it says that BECHU actually died in 1910. We don't know that for sure because Clem's book did not continue with that story, right? So I just wanted to add that footnote. In any case, if you could move on, I'm going to share with you a little bit of history of Joseph and Peter Rahman. These folks were, I guess, like BECHU, camera shy, so we don't have a lot of pictures of them, but that, typical mustache symbolizes their picture. In any case, very quickly, the Rahmans, and this is very unique about that family when they first came to British Guiana in 1859 on the SS Victor Emmanuel. There were 3 brothers, Rahman, Prahalad, and Lakoa. Now, what is interesting about them and unique is that they were kids. They came to the colony without their parents, and they were told, and again, this has been written about their history, that they're going to a place called Damra Tapu, the island of Demerara. So that's the vision they came with to the colony. John Rahman, who was a father, and Lakoa, who became Christians. In fact, Lakoa converted to Christianity and he changed his name to Moses Lakou. So the Rahmans and Lakous, if you're familiar with Borbies, New Amsterdam in Guyana, they were very popular families. They owned drugstores and they became lawyers and so on. They were both educated. They spoke Hindi. They were fluent in English and other languages. Of course, as kids, they played cricket and so on. Next slide, please. All right, so Joseph Rahman, we're looking at a person who was born, a number of years after 1838 when Indians came there, 1873, and he has a very long history of, being in Guyana and being concerned about indentureship and the post-indentureship period. One of the things he was always very consistent about is to ensure that there were openings, there were opportunities for Indians to become more literate, especially Indian women. One of the things that he also called for, and again, keep in mind, this is after the end of indenture in 1917, where he said that to protect the Indians in the colony, what the British should have done is to appoint an agent general from India who could oversee the interests of the Indians in Guyana. He is fascinated with Vivekananda's oratorical presentation in Chicago, 1894. He is known, this is Joseph, he's known as being an editor of the People. The Daily Argosy was a newspaper that was owned by a Scotsman, which catered to the interests of the planter class. He was also a manager of a printery and a bookstore, probably the only one in New Amsterdam, which was owned by the Dafsons. I would say one of the most significant contribution of Joseph Rohoman was his pivotal role in forming and creating the British Guiana East Indian Association. I would say this organization would be equivalent to the East Indian National Congress, the Professor Sam spoke about earlier, and of course also the Surinamese Immigration Association. It was an organization that was very forceful in the struggle to ensure that Indians have the right to vote, the franchise as we call it, among other things like ensuring that Indians have opportunities. The whole idea of education for Indian children was also part of the agenda of the British Guiana East Indian Association. So if you can move on to the next slide. All right, so a couple of things also to remember about Joseph Rohoman. He did popularize the concept of Mother India, the ancestral land, and that actually comes from a statement which he made. Our forefathers, for some ugly reason or another, left the shores of Mother India. And if you look at the newspapers that were being written, especially the Daily Chronicle and so on, during that time, that phrase was continuously being used. It was a phrase that was very popular in the organ of the British Guiana East Indian Association. Their organ was called the Indian Opinion, which was, again, the shaper of Indian opinion at that time. His major contribution, again, another one I would say is his ability to write. And at the young age of 21, in 1894, this would have been the same year, by the way, that BECHU would have been writing about the problems that Indian indentured faced at that time. If you look at the title, it's a very long title, India and the Progress of Her People at Home and Abroad, and how those in British Guiana may improve themselves. So the one thing that is coming true here from this kind of writing is that Joseph, as well as Peter, saw that connection with India, and it was a very strong connection that they kept on focusing on. Now, keep in mind, in the 1900s, when these things were happening, or when they were engaged in their activities, there were a number of organizations that were being formed. We talked about the British Guiana East Indian Association, the Dramatic Society, and so on. They were debating societies, and they were making that connection with what was happening in India. You have the movement for independence. Gandhi was very popular. Tagore was very popular among the Indians in Guyana, and that continued during that period in the early 1900s. When Rohoman presented his lecture, and it was published in December, a couple of months after, there was a response from the Argosy, right? The owner of the Argosy, who I said was a Scotsman, James Thompson, who basically says, well, look, you Indians, should not be entitled to self-government, right? Whether it's in Guyana or in India. And in his view, he's saying, well, because Indians are not disciplined enough, they're not responsible to be able to control their own destiny. And secondly, this is another statement made by Scotsman Thompson. Again, keep in mind, this was a national newspaper owned by the planters. He said, India, every improvement you see or progress you see in India is credited to the British. So this was a statement, and this was a challenge, and this was the nonsense, that the Rohomans and others were responding to at that time. If we can move on to the next slide, please. All right, Peter Rohoman, there are some pictures from newspapers, but again, we don't have a lot of pictures about them. His seminal work would have been the Centenary History of East Indians in Guyana, published in 1947. Peter was a younger brother. So now this book has a chock full of information, because you're looking at, the 100 years of Indian arrival from 1838 in Guyana. there's a lot of summaries about different organizations and the achievements and so on that Indians have made. There was also another title, very similar, which looked at the centenary history of East Indies and Guyana, which was published by the British Guiana East Indian Association. They had the 100 years of celebration in 1938, and that publication is also there. And it's a very remarkable publication because when you look at that piece of document, they have called for a number of different changes that should be reflective in British Guiana. And one of those, as I said before, is this whole notion of addressing illiteracy among Indians, because keep in mind, if Indians could not have voted, if they were not literate, and again, when I say literate from the perspective of the Europeans, literacy from their perspective means you had to be able to speak English. So that's one issue. So if they could not read and write English, it means that they could not vote. So only a handful of people could have voted during the time of Peter and Joseph Verhoeven. Peter did write a weekly column in the Daily Chronicle. The Daily Chronicle, unlike the Argosy, was a more, I would say, liberal newspaper, which gave a lot of space to Indians during that time. And of course, he wrote, under a pen name. He called himself the Pandit, and his column was titled Indian Intelligence, and he addressed a number of issues that were very pertinent to Indians during that time. One of the things about him, and I guess this may have been the influence of his older brother, was that he was also focusing as a member of the colony of British Guiana in terms of what they could also have been doing or do in regards to helping India become a much greater country. And again, this has been, this was very much dominant in his writing. If you can go to the next slide.
Dr. Ramharak, I hate to interrupt you, but would you mind making your closing statements, please?
Yes. Okay. One of the things, one of the organizations in which Peter was involved in was the East Indian Young Men's Society. And this was a sort of a training ground for a lot of folks who would go out there and make their mark in society. For instance, C.R. Jacob, who was a member, later became the leader of the British Guiana East Indian Association. If you can go on to the next slide. All right, so a couple of things, if I can end this. One of the dominant trend when you look at the writing of these two, folks, is that when they looked at India, which they saw as a bastion of culture and intellectual renaissance and so on, they saw India as a united India, not as multiple Indias or a land of, or a mythical place that you would find in the writings of a lot of folks today. And secondly, what they have done, which I guess would be an example for a lot of folks alive today, drawing from their experience, is that they have combined their intellectualism, their writing and their ideas, and they've actually put those ideas into practice. So they kind of link their activism in terms of what they were doing and trying to make sure that life was much better for Indians in British Guiana at that time. So I will end with that. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for sharing all of those insights, and I hope we can take questions from you at the end. I know that you have a lot more to share. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we move along now to our next speaker, and it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Al Creighton. He will immortalize Rajkumari Singh of Guyana. Mr. Creighton is an academic who has carried out extensive research and has several publications in books and academic journals. He is a playwright, poet, theatre director, and literary critic. He is a lecturer at the University of Guyana. He was the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education there. Mr. Creighton, welcome. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. I'll be very grateful if I could see the slides. And just to point out that I can only bullet point in 5 minutes. I cannot go in depth into what needs to be said about Rajkumari Singh. It is my honor to present the case of Rajkumari Singh as, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, Rajkumari Singh, a Guyanese poet, playwright, prose writer, literary and cultural matriarch. And she was what you may call a minor Guyanese writer, but a major force in Guyanese literature and culture. Next slide, please. And in order to establish the place of Rajkumari Singh in Guyanese literature and culture, it is necessary to give a brief sweep of the history of the literature to see where she fits in, to put her in context. Next slide. The Guyanese literature actually began with the Amerindian oral literature in the pre-Columbian, the pre-colonial era. And then the colonial era began with Walter Raleigh, 1597. Next slide. And then it went on through to the 19th century, when there was the beginning of modern Guyanese literature, which started with Egbert Martin in 1890. That they were followed by a period of imitation and also a period of cultural awareness, the development of ethnic cultural consciousness among the East Indians around 1897 through to 1940s, and the Africans. I would want to say that the East Indian development of cultural consciousness actually began with Joseph Rohoman, with his To India, Her People at Home and Abroad, and how those in British Guiana may improve themselves. And that basically started off that particular period of cultural awareness, which is very, very crucial to what we are saying about Rajkumari Singh. There was also a corresponding period of African cultural awareness, which started with Norman E. Cameron. Next slide, please. Then the literature, next slide, please. The literature moved on with the pre-independence literature, where there was a rise of nationalism and identity starting around the 1940s. Next slide, please. And then when we come to the independence literature in the 1960s, there was a deepening of nationalism, identity, and social realism. And here is where we find the emergence, the real emergence of East Indian Guyanese literature, followed by the advance of the contemporary literature. Next slide. Now, when we come next to, and please go on to the next slide, the real contributions of Rajkumari Singh, we can date that back to the rise of the East Indian consciousness and the rise of the East Indian cultural clubs. Around the 1920s, there were several East Indian cultural clubs developed, and also the British Guiana East Indian Association, in which Rajkumari's father was very active. And one of the major cultural clubs that contributed to the literature was the British Guiana Dramatic Society between 1929 and 1947. And they had a publication known as Dramag. And it was in Dramag that Rajkumari Singh actually began her publishing and her literary career. Next slide, please. When we come to the parentage of Rajkumari Singh, her father was Dr. Jung Bahadur Singh and her mother, Alice Bangwadai Singh, who were extremely active during that period of cultural awareness and development. They were political activists, they were cultural activists. They were responsible, well, her father was very much active in the East Indian Association, and they were both active in the British Guiana Dramatic Society, which was founded by Alice Bangwadai Singh. Next slide, please. So we have then Rajkumari Singh actually growing up in the background of that particular kind of activism and actually starting her cultural consciousness in the British Guiana Dramatic Society. And then when it comes to the 1960s, she began to make her contribution to independence literature, to nationalism and ideology. And also she worked in the Guyana National Service, and she was responsible for the People's Culture Corps. Now, according to Jeremy Pointing, Rajkumari joined the government's program, the government of the PNC at that time, because she wanted to respond to the marginalization of East Indian literature, East Indian culture, and the marginalization of East Indians in the politics of the PNC. According to Pointing, she joined in order to fight that from inside and to bring about change. And indeed, she did bring about very significant movements in the development of the literature and the culture. Next slide, please. We find as well, in parallel with Rajkumari Singh's work, was the development of the real roots of Indian culture in the East Indian literature of Guyana, particularly led by writers such as Sheikh Sadiq, next slide, writers such as Ruplal Monar, and please keep the slides going, thank you very much, Ruplal Monar and Arnold Itwaru. The next writer, next slide please, Seisnarayan Persad, is actually an example of another line of East Indian literary development, because the East Indian writers, and particularly those in exile, were also responding to the marginalization, and Seisnarayan Persad applied himself in particular to the political oppression and marginalization. Next slide, please. Now, where Rajkumari Singh linked to that is that she deepened the East Indian Guyanese literature. She wrote about indentureship, the East Indian woman, and she introduced a very strong note of feminism into the writing of her poems, her prose pieces, her short stories, and her plays. She also contributed to radio drama and radio cultural programs around the 1970s. Next slide, please. So that we find Rajkumari Singh here making a mark in the literature and the culture of the country. She wrote about Indian culture, taking progressive approaches, applying herself to old traditions and also to identity, making the Coolie identity something positive, and also the Indian festivals such as Deepavali. She wrote plays and stories in Kai. Kai was the publication of the History and Arts Council to which she contributed. Next slide, please. Now, Rajkumari's other really major contribution was as a matriarch and mentor. She was largely responsible for the development of a number of writers at the time, young writers at the time, who went on to become leading Guyanese writers. In particular, Mahadev Das, Ruplal Monar, to a lesser extent, Henry Mutu, because his major area was drama, and Gora Singh, who was her son, who was a dancer, as well as Janet Naidu, a poet. She formed the messenger group with these and many other writers who were tutored and mentored by her. Now, when we talk about the messenger group, we are not talking about East Indians only, because that group included many writers from other ethnic groups, particularly the Africans at the time. And therefore, Rajkumari Singh's contribution was wide-ranging. Gora Singh was her son, a Kathak dancer, who founded the Rajkumari Cultural Center in New York, which up to today is continuing the kind of work that she did. Keep the slides rolling, please. Next one. And here we have basically a picture of Gora and his dancers, which included his sisters. Next slide, please. Because Rajkumari's daughters are currently active in the Rajkumari Cultural Center in New York. No, please don't. I'm sorry, very sorry. Go back, please. Yes, this one. Now, Rajkumari's heritage then can be seen as, next slide, please. Rajkumari's heritage then can be seen as, can be seen as the advancement of national literature, with nationalism, the Guyana National Service, which was largely responsible for Mahadev Das. Mahadev Das actually started there and went on to be Guyana's leading female poet. Ruplal Monar, Janet Naidu. Next slide, please. The other area of her major contribution would have been the Guyanese East Indian literature, with the deepening the cultural roots, traditions, and identity, introducing the strong note of feminism, and in the mentoring of other writers. Next
Mr.
slide,
Creighton,
please.
Mr. Creighton, would you mind making closing comments?
Yes, that's what I'm about to do. Thank you.
Great.
And here, the closing comment I wanted to make is actually in the previous slide to this one. The previous slide to this one, please. Where we see the work of Rajkumari Singh, particularly in her granddaughter. Her granddaughter is Sharda Shakti Singh, one of the most promising playwrights, Indian playwrights of Guyana at the present time. And I will end there. The next slides contain references, Rajkumari Singh's publications and the references. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Creighton. This was an excellent presentation, quite insightful. And I think we will have some questions for you at the end. Thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, our next honoree is from Jamaica, and it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Akshay Mansingh to honor the memory of his father, Dr. Ajay Mansingh. Dr. Akshay Mansingh is the head of the Division of Sports Medicine at the University of the Western Jamaica and a consultant orthopedic surgeon. He is the Chief Medical Officer of the West Indies Cricket Board and was on the inaugural Medical Committee of the International Cricket Council. Welcome, Dr. Mansingh. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I await the slides to start. And I'll just warn that the slides, the points change very quickly. So please be alert. It's a distinct pleasure to be invited to speak about Professor Ajay Mansingh, my father, who was born in Fatehpur, Uttar Pradesh in 1932. Could we have the next slide, please? He left India in 1960, but as he'd point out, India never left him. And he spent 13 years in Canada where he did his PhD and worked before coming to Jamaica because he hadn't seen cricket for 13 years. When he got here, one of the first things he noted was the distorted history about the Indians in Jamaica. Next, please. Where the history of the Indians in Jamaica was written by all but Indians or Indo-Jamaicans. Even things like the actual date of arrival and the vessel that arrived were wrong. And there were many claims as to why they came that were concocted. One in particular that affected him was that single ladies came alone as indentured laborers, something that he realized that from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, that was not going to happen. Very, very early on, literally within a month, he met Bertram Chutkan and Earl Johnson of the Sanatan Dhan Mandir, who took him to meet many of the original indentured laborers who were still alive. The first one being Kulsuma Baksh, who gave her story of walking from her uncle's house to her father's house and being kidnapped and taken to Calcutta, put on a ship and brought to Jamaica, vindicating the conviction that these people would not have come on their own volition. And that was because he was well versed with Indo-Jamaican culture. 70% of the migrants, as you're aware, were from Eastern Uttar Pradesh and Western Bihar, a culture which was similar to his, and a culture that was not understood by the European-inclined Jamaicans who wrote the history previous to that. In fact, when he met this gentleman, if you just press the thing, when he met this gentleman and introduced himself as Ajay Mansingh, the conversation continued with this gentleman quoting from the Mahabharata and Ramayana, quoting couplets, dohas, etc., etc. And when in the end, my father asked him what his name was, he said, my name is Imam Ali. And he said, well, as a Muslim, how are you quoting all these Indian scriptures? He says, sir, you're a guest in my house, and it's my duty to make you feel comfortable. And then he went on to ask it, which means, does this not still happen in the motherland? And my father was convinced that if he had told him that India and Pakistan had been created, he probably would have had a heart attack right there. So the cultural nuances of the Indians that came were well versed and well known by him from his own upbringing. One thing that he was therefore able to do was to note the enormous passive contribution by the Indians in Jamaica. I say passive contribution because being only 2% of the population, they were neither a political threat nor a voice that had to be contended with. Yet their enormous contribution to the society of Jamaica was documented. Documented were things like contributions to sugar cultivation, to rice cultivation, which till it ended in the 1990s, had terminologies that were straight out of the villages of Uttar Pradesh and so on. The jewelry industry, which was commented upon, and there was a picture that was up before that. This is a picture from northern Jamaica. And he later had it painted because it was such a rich depiction of the jewelry, such that in the late 19th century, there was an expedition out of the UK which commented on these laborers who, with the simplest of tools, produced the most intricate jewelry that they're able to peddle on weekends. So much so that at the turn of the last century, the Jamaican Legislative Assembly spent an entire day discussing the bad habits of the Indians who would turn to this cottage industry and then earn money on the side when they had their free time. Next down point, please. What he was able to do was to recognize the cultural confidence and awareness of the Indo-Jamaicans, people who could contribute to Jamaica, in spite of having to face things like even being forced to change their religion just to acquire education or healthcare, who could not be married in Hindu or Islamic traditions till 1958, made retroactive to 1954, or could not have a place of worship, similar to many other countries in the Caribbean. Yet they had the cultural confidence to be themselves and carry on their traditions. And that led to, next slide please, that led to a lot of postulative new perspectives. Number one of which was the Hindu influences on Rastafari, of which he published quite extensively. Two of the founders of Rastafari were Lenny Howell and Joseph Hibbert. Howell, when he proclaimed Rastafari, changed his name to Gyan Guru Maharaj. We were able to interview Joseph Hibbert before he died, and he spoke about spending time with Indian communities in Jamaica and hearing about kings who are God incarnates. And he said there must be one in Africa. And when Haile Selassie proclaimed himself as Lord of Lords, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, he said, there we go, that is ours in Africa. This is a picture of a village in Jamaica. And if you look on the top right, you'll see a man with locks. When the early Rastafaris came, or rather when the Rastafarian intelligentsia came to meet with him in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when he published about the Hindu influences of Rastafari, they asked, what does Jatavi mean? And he said, you mean Jatavi? They said, yes, that's the word. He said, well, Jata means locks, and Jatavi in Bhojpuri, in Eastern European language, means locks. They said that's exactly what the Rastas used to call those locks early on. And you can see the locks on this sadhu in an Indian village in Jamaica from that time. His influence moved across to teaching of all religions in CXC, which was initiated from Jamaica, surprise, surprise. And he actually helped writing the syllabus of the Hindu and Islamic courses for the CXC. Last slide, please. So, can you switch slides, please? So what he was able to do was to hold numerous cultural events at the highest level. We're talking about state visits, national festivities, etc., which brought forward Indian culture in Jamaica. He would spread the information through exhibitions and conferences, and of course, documented it through the seminal work, the very first book on Indo-Jamaicans, Home Away from Home, which recognized 150 years of Indian presence in Jamaica. What he was able to do was to put Indo-Jamaicans in the matrix of Jamaican history and culture in a country where the numbers not very large, but the influence and the camaraderie was very deep. Thank you very much.
Dr. Man Singh, thank you very much. And I have to say that was an excellent presentation. Home Away from Home was a terrific book. Everything I know about Indians in Jamaica, I basically learned from there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We now move on to Guadeloupe. Our next presenter is Mr. Fred Negret. He's been here before. He will be highlighting the life and legacy of SINGH Revolu of Guadeloupe. Mr. Negret is the president of the Guadeloupean Council for Indian Languages and is a former vice principal of the Collège de Ville Sainte Anne, Guadeloupe. Welcome back, sir. Please present for 5 minutes.
Yes,
okay.
Go ahead.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, I had a problem with my microphone. I will speak to you briefly about Mr. SINGH Revolu because of his contribution to a better understanding of East Indian in Guadeloupe. Mr. SINGH Revolu is from India. He's from South India. First, he's one of the few French people without a first name. This is a long story. He's a doctor in geography, and he has been teaching in Guadeloupe from 1975 to 2004. Okay. And during this period, during this time, he could study the geography of Guadeloupe, and more especially, he could study East Indians in Guadeloupe. He returned in the University of Bordeaux in 2004, and he has been retired in 2009. He wrote a lot of books, but I will focus on two important books from my point of view. The first one is Les Indiens de la Guadeloupe. It was not translated in English. It could be translated in English like East Indians from Guadeloupe. It was published in 1987. And the other famous book is Les Indiens de la Caraïbe, East Indians of the Caribbean. But this book too was not translated in English. This last book was published in 1987. This last book is important because it studies in a large point of view the Indian of the whole Caribbean, meaning Guyana, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Trinidad. It is a very interesting study. Okay, and this is also an interesting study because it gives us a lot of document. Mr. SINGH could access a lot of sources from the government of India, from the government of France, and we could access in this last book a very important document that has been used by other researchers later. Okay. On the next slide, I will show you why he's so important, because he's a great researcher, specifically on the question of East immigration in the French West Indies, in Martinique and in Guadeloupe, but specifically in Guadeloupe. His works is a milestone in the knowledge of East Indians in the French-speaking Caribbean, and it was the first deep research on that subject. Before him, before Mr. SINGH, there was Mr. Guy Lasserre. He wrote a famous geographic study that is called La Guadeloupe, Études géographiques. And this book was a document interesting, but focus only on geography. There are in this book some pages, some important pages on East Indians in Guadeloupe. This study is important because it was printed in 1961, and we have numbers. We have or to say the chief numbers of Indians, the places where Indians are, etc. And it is important because we can compare the situation of these Indians in 1961 and how they evolved later. Okay, after much later, in 2005, we will have Mr. Christian Schnakenboer that will give us a very famous study. This study is called Immigration Indienne en Guadeloupe, 1948 to 1923. It was published in 2005. And today, the study of East Indian in Guadeloupe is based on this book. It is a reference. But why do I mention these two persons, Guy Lasserre and Christian Schnakenboer? It's because SINGH is in the middle. It is a landmark. And it's because we have research from SINGH that we could go forward and have much more detail after about East Indians. Today, SINGH is a bit contested, and it is normal that researchers are contesting his researches. But he gave us basis to go further. His work needed to be updated, specifically concerning the numbers of Indians who came, the list of boats, the details about the boats. But SINGH opened doors, and it's because of him that we could go much farther. So I wanted to pay tribute today to him because he gave us basis to study much deeper East Indian in Guadeloupe. And if we know a bit much better East Indians in Guadeloupe today, it's mainly because of this man. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mr. Negri, for sharing that valuable information about him. We will now hear from, thank you. We will now hear from South Africa. Professor Kalpana Hiralal will pay tribute to Professor Fatima Mayo. Dr. Hiralal is an associate professor of history at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Her PhD dissertation focused on Indian immigrants to Africa in the context of settlement, trade, and identity formation. Welcome, Dr. Hiralal. Nice to have you here with us. I hope 5 minutes will be sufficient.
Thank you to the ICC and AGI for giving me this opportunity to do a very short presentation on Fatima Mia, who is considered to be one of South Africa's most distinguished leaders. And I have to say that it's quite difficult, quite a challenge to actually capture her contributions in 5 minutes. But subsequently, I have opted to focus on two of her very endearing contributions: her sterling efforts towards improving race relations in South Africa, her deep commitment to non-racialism, and to quote Dr. Betty Govinden from her book, Sister Outsiders, Mia's non-racialism did not involve eliding or flattening differences, but focusing on different types of oppressions amongst the oppressed and working for solidarity and unity, alongside differences, and second, her fervent efforts at improving the lives of the underclasses. So what you see on your screen is a very young Fatima Mir, who was a fearless activist and outspoken critic of the apartheid regime. Next slide, please. At 16, she showed her feisty independent spirit while still a student. She formed the Students' Passive Resistance Council and staged a Shakespearean drama production to raise funds for the passive resistance campaign of the 1940s. Her maiden political speech at Red Square in 1946 drew praises from NIC leader Dr. Moiti Naika. Next slide, please. Fatima worked tirelessly to better relations between the race groups, and this was noticeable in her work during the 1949 riots in Durban, which strained relations between Indians and Africans. Together with the ANC Women's League, Bertha and Kise, they worked tirelessly to improve Indo-African relations and assisted many families, both Indian and African, who were displaced by the riots. They set up relief committees, canvassed for funds and groceries from local shopkeepers. Mir and Kise went actually further. They established the Durban and District Women's League in 1952, the first women's organization with joint Indian and African membership. And the League provided an opportunity and a platform for African Indian women to work as a collective under one organization on common issues affecting their communities. But Fatima Mir's support for non-racialism can also be discerned from her efforts at collective resistance and organization. She was actively involved in the multiracial women's organization, the Federation of South African Women, established in 1954, which played a pivotal role in the anti-past march in Pretoria in 1956, as well as her role in the Defiance campaign. Fatima was involved in many women and youth committees, and in 1956, the Women's League staged a protest march against passes in Pietermaritzburg. In the 1970s, Fatima worked steadfastly to forge closer relations with women across all races, and this led to the formation of the Black Women's Federation, which aimed at mobilizing women nationally as one united body in their fight against apartheid and gender oppression. Next slide. Fatima's work is, particularly her work amongst the poor, is quite legendary. And she was, throughout her life, an outspoken critic of the apartheid regime. She was a prolific charity worker. She worked tirelessly to improve the lives of the underclasses. She assisted community. So as I was saying, Fatima's work amongst the poor was legendary, and she was a champion, a fervent champion of the underclasses. And she assisted communities during the floods in Durban, established relief communities, food and shelter for the destitute, and worked with several NGOs. Next slide, please. She became firm friends with the Mandelas. Nelson Mandela, his wife Winnie, and Fatima were both members of the Black Women's Federation. And Mandela was a frequent visitor to the Mir home in Mgeni Road in Durban. And they forged close bond and became lifelong friends throughout. They had a very special relationship. Next slide, please. Fatima, like many activists of her time, was subject to several banning orders and survived even an assassination attempt, but that did not actually deter her. She continued to be a vocal critic of the apartheid regime. Post-1994, her activism continued with community work in South Africa, championing the plight of the poor. She died in 2010, and she left a shining legacy of commitment to social justice and equality. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. And someone was just asking to confirm your name. So it is indeed Dr. Kalpana Hiwala. We move on to another speaker from South Africa, and this is Karishma Singh, who will honor the memory of Dr. Persad Ginwala. Karishma is from an accomplished family of doctors, lawyers, educators, and advocates who have been instrumental in contributing to the freedom struggle from apartheid in South Africa. It's my pleasure to welcome you. Please present for 5 minutes.
Sure, thank you. Namaste, Vanakkam, Salam. Sawubona to everybody. Thank you for having me on this platform today. I'm indeed very honored to be speaking and honoring the memory of Dr. Khurshid Jinwala Rustomjee. Okay, next slide, please. I'm going to actually just summarize to keep within the time limit. So Dr. Khurshid Jinwala Rustomjee was born into the Parsi community in Mumbai in 1929. Her family were originally from Iran and fled to India many centuries ago due to the oppression that they suffered as a minority community as well. Her grandfather was an industrialist and he moved to South Africa in the early 1900s, but later moved to Mozambique. That's exactly where her father was born. And later on, he moved to South Africa to obtain a permit to stay, where he was going to open an oil factory. She was born, like I mentioned, in Mumbai in 1929 and moved to Mozambique. And later at 6 months, she moved to Kempton Park, Johannesburg, where her father established his businesses, and they had 2 siblings. Next slide, please. She attended St. Anthony's Primary School in Johannesburg, as well as the Johannesburg Indian School, where she completed her education up to standard 6. And thereafter, she returned to Mumbai, where she attended St. Joseph's Convent and St. Xavier's College, where she completed her matric and obtained a senior Cambridge certificate. She then moved to Ireland in Dublin and attended the National University of Ireland to study medicine, where she met her husband, Rustom Rustomjee, an insurance consultant, and they later on had 3 sons, which we will get to. While she was in Ireland, she met students from all over the world, as well as South Africa, who were in exile. They made her aware of the oppression being committed towards the African, colored, and Indian diaspora in South Africa at the hands of the white minority government, which influenced her political mindset. And she, in turn, started thinking about how she could actually make a difference in the freedom struggle as well. She graduated in 1953 and interned in England. After qualifying, she returned to Johannesburg and began working as a medical doctor at the Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital in the city of Johannesburg. Next slide, please. In 1955, after marriage, she and her husband moved to the coastal city of KwaZulu-Natal. It was during this period she became acquainted with leaders of the National Indian Congress and countless other activists. She took over the practice of Dr. Ghanem, who was the first Indian woman doctor. Unfortunately, or should I say due to ethical reasons, she wasn't able to conduct abortions and joined the practice of Dr. M.G.H. Myatt for a year or 2 prior to joining the pediatric department of the segregated King Edward VIII Hospital in 1961, where she remained until 1963, when she left to open her own practice in Ketamana the very same year. After setting up the Ketamana practice, she went on to open a Spingo and Chatsworth practices as well. Next slide, please. During the struggle for free, non-racial, and democratic South Africa, in the 1960s through to the 1990s, there emerged numerous low-profile activists who played key roles in this regard, and she was one such activist who concentrated on the struggles of the disadvantaged, and she wanted to impact on the social and community fields within South Africa to realize and attain our political freedom as it is today. In 1980, Dr. Jinwala Rustomjee was president of the Durban Indian Child Welfare Society, the National Council of Child Welfare, the Durban Benevolent Society for the Unemployed, the Medical Women's Association, University Women's Association, Full-Time Doctors Association, and the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Trust, an organization that she had been associated with since 1960. In 1993, Dr. Jinwala Rustomjee was appointed to the ANC's Commission on the Human Resource Development. When Nelson Mandela became president of the new non-racial democracy in 1994, he appointed her as South Africa's ambassador to Italy. She served in this position until 1999. Her public service career spanned for 5 decades. She held a medical degree, postgraduate qualification in hospital administration and health service from London, and a master's degree in community health from Natal. Next slide, please. In the 1980s, the anti-apartheid activists decided to launch an alternative newspaper called UKUSA. Dr. Khurshid played a leading role in this brave and courageous venture. She obtained the backing of the ANC, which was outlawed but active at underground levels at this time. During its short-lived lifespan, the UKUSA project played a vital role in mobilizing our Rainbow Nation in one of the biggest marches in Durban in 1989, and subsequently in the marches on the segregated beaches and the whites-only Addington Hospital. UKUSA newspaper did not last because the National Party government at the time had embarked on a number of repressive measures to sabotage progressive media organizations in Durban and around the country. Dr. Khurshid felt very hurt, as well as the other freedom fighters, because they really worked extensively in trying to keep this, alive. Next slide, please. In 1969, Dr. Khurshid Rashamdi traveled to England to study hospital administration, and while she was there, she interacted with leaders and members of the ANC who were in exile. She returned to South Africa in 1972 and served as a principal officer and superintendent until 1978 at the R.K. Khan Hospital located in Chatsworth. During this period, she and her family moved out of their home in Asheville and to Reservoir Hills. During the mid-1980s, she played an active role in the Reservoir Hills branch of the Natal Indian Congress, and she was later elected as chairperson of the ANC branch in Reservoir Hills in the early 1990s. Upon resigning from R.K. Khan Hospital in 1978, she joined the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Natal Medical School as a senior lecturer and acting head until 1992. Together with her hardworking committee members, she obtained the support of the South African and Indian governments, including the KZN provincial government. And in 2012, she built the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Center. She was an inspiration to us all, and with each step she took, she paved the way for a better and brighter South Africa. Dr. Khurshid Jinwala Rastamji left very big shoes to fill, and we bid farewell to her at the ripe old age of 90. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Singh. She was quite an admirable woman. Thank you very much for sharing this insights.
Thank you.
Our final presenter, yes. So our final presenter is Dr. Satyendra Pirtham, and he will recognize Professor Basdev Bisundel of Mauritius. Dr. Pirtham is an historian attached to Upper Vasi Ghat World Heritage Site, and he's also a member of the International Scientific Committee for the Indentured Labour Route Project, which is supported by UNESCO. It's my pleasure to welcome you. Please go ahead and share for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Shalima. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Good morning already here. It's only almost 1 in the morning. So basically, thank you for putting on the slide. I'll be speaking about Basdev Bisundel, professor. He lived from 1906 to 1991. For me, it's very special because I am third generation Bisundelist. My father was also a historian, and his brothers were Bisundelist. They were his followers. And also my grandfather and his brothers were also Bisundelist. They served in the Jan Andolan, the people's movement that he founded, and the Swayam Sevak, what I'm going to talk about. So basically, he was born in 1906 in April. We just commemorated his birth anniversary. And he was born in a village in Tayak, Rivière des Anguilles, the south of Mauritius. And as a youth, him and his parents and his brothers, they moved to Port Louis. In Tayak, several years ago, there was a memorial museum for his brother. I worked on a project to restore that memorial museum. And in 1916, they moved to Port Louis, where he grew up. I won't go into details about his early life because we don't have the time. 1932, he went to India after passing his A-level in Mauritius. He went to India to study. He spent 6 years there at DAV College in India, and then in Punjab, if I remember correctly. And then he went to study in Calcutta at the university there. And twice he met Gandhi, and he fell under the influence of the Indian National Congress, Gandhi, Gandhism, etc. 1939, he comes to Mauritius. He assumes the role of a Hindu missionary. He brings about the cultural revival of the Hindus in Mauritius, the Indo-Mauritians. And he starts his missionary work in 1939. He's considered as a Gandhian, a Hindu missionary, an intellectual and a philosopher. That's why we call him Professor or Pandit Biswas Dayal. He was an erudite in the Hindu faith. Not to say that he also knew about other religions such as Hindu, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, etc. So his work would start in 1939 and would last until 1991 for half a century. In that time span, as a scholar, as a researcher, he was well known in many countries: India, South Africa, the US, UK, and other countries of the Indian diaspora. He wrote more than 600 seminal articles and close to 30 to 40 books in his long career in Hindi, French, English, in Sanskrit even. So he was well known. And the key moment comes in 1940 when he founds the Jan Andolan movement, the people's movement. And in 1943, he has the Mahayaj in Port Louis, in the capital of Mauritius, where 100,000 Indo-Mauritians gather. And it is all this is done to educate the Mauritian masses about their history, about who they are, to give them a new pride in their community, because we were, as in Mauritius, in other parts of the plantation world, Hindus, Muslims were always, Indians were always belittled because of colonial racism, prejudice. They were saying that they were inferior, their religion, their culture was inferior, when in fact they come from one of the great civilizations of world history. So then in 1944, he was seen as being one of the major public enemies. He was followed by the police. He was arrested 3 times. He was almost deported to Diego Garcia, a Mauritian dependency in Chagos in the Indian Ocean. And he was the arch enemy almost of the British governor of the day, Donald Mackenzie Kennedy. 1947, 1948, he founded 300 Baikas and Hindi schools in Mauritius. And in 1947, he organized a boycott of the races, because in other races, they tended to denigrate the Hindu and Muslim participants. By 1948, there was the new constitution, new election, which was adopted in Mauritius in the first historic general elections, where he was able to get the people to sign their names, because one of the conditions to vote was for people to sign in their languages. So he went around the island and he was able to get all these people to sign their names in Hindi, Bhojpuri, Tamil, Telugu, and Marathi. And by 1950, he was also instrumental in getting Labor Day. Yesterday, we commemorated Labor Day, in getting Labor Day to be a public holiday here in Mauritius. And by 1951, he was founded the Zamana newspaper, his newspaper where he, along with his brother, he would bring about some type of political consciousness of the Mauritian masses. We must remember that he was greatly influenced by Mahatma Gandhi. Manilal Doctor, who was in Mauritius from 1907 to 1911, and also by R.K. Budan, the first Indo-Mauritian lawyer, and also by Pandit Kashinath Kistu. And he also played a key role in the spreading of the Arya Samaj movements in different parts of the island, and setting up of Baitkas in the 50s and 60s and 40s. He basically did what would be called what Paulo Freire did in Brazil, although he was ahead of Paulo Freire, the pedagogy of the masses, the education of the oppression of the masses for almost 20 or 30 years. And by 1958, his brother, Sukhdev Biswas Dayal, founded the Independent Forward Bloc, being inspired by the freedom movement in India. And also, by 1968-67, they also helped in bringing about Persian independence. But after 68, more or less, 69, Basti Biswas Dayal considered his work to be done, but he considered his social work, he continued writing, he continued influencing 3 generations of Mauritians. He was also a major influence on Sir Anirudh Jagannath, the lately departed president and Prime Minister of Mauritius, who is called the father of the economic miracle of Mauritius, of modern Mauritius. He also, even Sir Siv Sagar Ramgoolam, the founder of the Mauritian nation, said that without Biswas Dayal, his movements, and his brother, it would have been very difficult to have brought Mauritian independence. So when we look at his legacy, by the 70s and 80s, he started to be forgotten because he was no longer in the public limelight. And by 1980s, his nephew, Uttam Biswas Dayal, whom some of you might know, was the director of the MGR, the Mahatma Gandhi Institute, for 18 years, along with my father. They tried to reinstitute his memory. So today in Mauritius, we have a trust fund named after him. We have streets, certain areas named after Basti Bisundel, the Port Louis waterfront. If you come here, you will see that there is the Esplanade Basti Bisundel. There's a school or schools named after him, and his memory is remembered. Whenever you speak about some of the older generations, they know who he is. With a lot of respect, they speak about Professor Basti Bisundel. And when the younger generations are now being educated a bit about who he is, about his accomplishments, he is one of the giants of Mauritian history, who has had a large influence, cast a large shadow. And as I have written several articles on him, in 2002, we inaugurated a large statue of him at the waterfront in Port Louis. And I always tell some of my students is that he is as close as we got to Gandhi. Although he had a family, he was married, he had children, he devoted his life, even certain times neglecting his duty as a family man, because he sacrificed his life. He believed in the Manava Dharma Shastra of dedicating your life. Service to man is service to God. That was one of his motto. And Basti Bisundel was one of those important men, really, that showed that had he not been there, this Hindu cultural revival might not have happened in Mauritius. Mauritian independence may have happened, but in another context. And that truly we need to thank him for what he has done in terms as one of the important figures of the modern Indian diaspora in general. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. You were on point with that. And we really appreciate your contribution and his. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have a South African who will present on someone very special from Fiji. And at this point, I really want to say hello to Padmaji. Very nice to have you with us. So may I please present Professor Uma Mestri, who will speak about Professor Brijlal of Fiji. Dr. Mestri is a Professor Emeritus of History at the University of Western Cape in South Africa. She's a scholar, and she's also the great-granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi. It's our honor to have you once again on this platform. Please go ahead and share for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. So Professor Brijlal is one of the youngest of the intellectuals and activists who's being honored this evening. Most of those being honored were actually born in the first 3 decades of the 20th century. And Prof. Lal belongs to the second half of this 20th century. And so there is actually some sadness because it is only just about 4 months since we marked his death, but great joy in marking his intellectual journey and contribution. Speaking of, I'm very aware that I'm a South African speaking about a giant of Fiji. And also, so what comes to mind is also what will Professor Lal say about what I'm about to say about him. So I wanted the next slide, please. So instead of a chronological account of Prof. Lal's life, I just wanted to share 2 images because images speak a lot. And so on the left, we have an image of Professor Lal with his grandparents, his grandfather came as an indentured laborer to Fiji in around 1908, and Prof. Lal grew up in the village of Tabia. Bridge climbed ladders, he scaled cliffs, and he reached the apex where he received numerous accolades in his lifetime for the extraordinary range of books that he produced. Slide 2, please. The next slide. So, I mean, these are some of the books that we have, starting with his Girmitiyas, The Origins of Fiji Indians, to Mr. Tulsi's Store, to a biographical production, The Eye of the Storm, of a Fiji politician, Bearing Witness, Broken Waves. Next slide, please. So again, we have like the Encyclopedia of Indian Diaspora for one, Chalo Jihaji, Other Side of Midnight. These visuals, the covers of his books tell you the extent of his greatness. So instead of telling you about what all his books were, I just wanted to have a short paragraph because I asked myself, so what makes a great historian? Bridge started with a monograph on indentured labor in Fiji, a kind of very dry quantitative history. And he moved on to then tell the stories of indenture in a creative way in what she called faction writing, creative nonfiction. And the goal was then to move from just speaking to historians interested in very specific details to reaching bigger audiences. And from a local study of indenture, he became interested in Pacific lives. He wrote biographies of Fijian politicians, and then he began to stretch even wider, so that soon his name became known from the shores of the Pacific to the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. The breadth of his publications are simply extraordinary. I found books that I hadn't known of before, a historical dictionary of Fiji. He wrote a history of a building, co-edited a history of a building. And so the range is quite extraordinary. Bridge himself, one defining feature of his writing was that he himself said this, that I dance to the tune of my own music. And I think that's really important because that's the way in which he defined himself. Writing, he says, was an act of revenge against a culture of indifference and forgetfulness. And writing mattered to him. He said, writing matters because you can change society, you can inform people, and reading matters. And that is why he wrote for a broader public. What I loved most about Bridge was that his total disregard for conventions and norms. He would chuckle about these kind of things that actually tethered academics, and he enjoyed the freedoms from that kind of bureaucratic chains. He enjoyed writing, but he enjoyed it more when he linked up with other editors and co-authors. And until the very end, he was a man full of ideas. But you know, being a great historian whose legacy will be quite long-lived in scholarship, is not really the sum of Bridges' achievement. I know of South African historians, a couple who are the greatest South African social historians that are produced, but not necessarily the best kind of people. Some of them you'd be scared to talk to them. But Bridge was not like that. Bridge was very humble and down to earth, an extremely humorous person who had no desire to be treated like an academic royalty. And in the end, that kind of genius combined with his fearlessness, and that fearlessness which led him to be banned from his beloved Fiji, that is the man that makes Bridge a man to remember and to cherish. So it is not just being a great historian, but being a good person. And that is what makes Bridge great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing, as always. One important thing that comes to mind, having heard about Professor Bridgelal and all the other intellectuals that we've spoken of today, I'm reminded of this very important statement. If I see further, it is because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. Thank you all presenters for sharing all that you have on the giants in the Indian diaspora. At this time, I will ask that if you have any comments or questions, please let us keep them brief. We are already at 5 p.m., but still we want to give you an opportunity to raise the important questions that our presenters can answer. So please show your electronic hand if you would like to be called upon. You can ask a short question. The electronic hand is in the reaction button. Just click on the reaction button and on the raised hand symbol so that I could call upon you. Okay, so I see a question from H. Singh. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment about Indian women who came as indentured laborers or during indenture. There was a very strong denial by the speaker that none of the Indian women came out of their own will. They were all kidnapped or forced. I think that's as false as saying that all women came on their own. There were various modes of recruitment and various reasons for their coming. I want to remind you of Amitabh Ghosh's trilogy, the heroine of the woman at the center of the trilogy, and you see what kind of complications were there in the entire structure which forced that woman DT to come to the, what was that place? Sorry, the first place where Indians came. And so to insist on one particular mode of recruitment, and more importantly, if an Indian woman came on her own, it is not to be used against her, but it should be, she should be praised and credited for that she took the agency of her life and came here and made a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate what you've shared. David Clark, go ahead, please. You can unmute your mic, David. Mr. Clark, please unmute your mic.
They should have an clock. Oh yes, I would like to say thank you for your Zoom meeting. It was a very wonderful presence on the diaspora of unique diaspora in the world, land. Yes.
From Naren.
Yeah, Naren, go ahead, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everybody. I just want to echo the sentiments, although I joined the meeting a little late, of other participants. If these presentations could be in some way considered to be in book form at some point.
Yes.
They're of excellent quality, because at the end of the day, you know, we're leaving to generations a posterity that needs to be recorded, that needs to be looked at, because it's in essence from where we came from. And these great people have left us with a legacy that we need to emulate. You know, the generations of today are too keyboard orientated instead of being children of the soil. So I would hope Dr. Kumar and Bindu, you know, y'all can consider something like that. It will be great to have a book of all these presentations with a little bit more research as well, I suppose.
Thank you very much. Dr. Singh, you want to try now? You were unmuted, now you're muted again. Please unmute.
Is that good now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I just want to make a quick comment. BECHU was originally from Calcutta. He immigrated when he was 30. But the most important thing about him, when the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the distressed state of the sugar industry, he was the only Indian immigrant to produce a memorandum and to testify before this committee. And that is very significant. And he never went to school. He was schooled by an Indian lady, a white lady, a missionary. Thank you, that's all. I want to commend the organizer for putting this together, and I echo what that gentleman just said. As a matter of fact, I wrote something, but I don't know whether it went through. We should put this thing in a book format. It's really, really nice that Kumar and you all have put this thing together. I congratulate you from the bottom of my heart. This is tremendous. Thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you so much. Charlene, welcome.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Namaste. I want, first of all, congratulations to the panelists, to Kumar, to you, Shalima, and everyone who organized this session and those sessions over the past 100 events that were hosted here. I mean, a mammoth task indeed. However, may I just add that I still get the sense that we are coming from a minority position. We haven't entered the mainstream discussion, the mainstream narrative, and it's still very much a struggle. I heard the previous comments with respect to converting these sessions into books. My question is, I'm leaving this on the table. Where do we go from here? How do we stop bring in the Indian diaspora, the Indian discussion, whatever part of the world we might be from, and whatever numbers we comprise. How do we stop taking it from a minority point of view and become part of the mainstream discussion? And that perplexes me no end. So I leave that on the table. Thank you, Sharma.
Thank you, Charlene. Any day you want to join in again, we would appreciate you being here so that that question can be raised again and addressed. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, we have one more question in the chat, and this is for Dr. Brinsley Samaru. Dr. Samaru Jalaluddin Khan would like to know how was the development of the Arima Road over land financed? Was it a local or central government road? Can you say?
Right. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. First of all, to the question, did he have a Islamic contribution in his community? Right. No, he was not. He was not a religious person. He was more a secular person, and his religion, if anything, was Anglican. He was not Muslim. So that I don't think he made too much of a contribution to the Islamic community. And to the second question, the road from Blanchisseuse to Arima was financed by the state, but F.E.M. HOSEIN was the parliamentary representative for that area. And it is to his credit that he pressed relentlessly on the government. So it was not a locally financed road, it was centrally financed, but because of the persistent agitation that F.E.M. HOSEIN made for the building of that road from Blanchisseuse to Arima.
Okay, great. Dr. Samaru, let me just ask you this question as well that Kasraj is raising. Is the West India Club and the India Club the same?
No, the West Indian Club and the India Club were two different organizations formed at different times. One, the India Club by Adrian Kohler, Renzi, and H.P. Singh, and so on. And the other one at a later time with, generally the same founders.
Right. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, we will bring the Q&A to a close. And I will now end here my presentation for now, and I will invite Janine Gilhari of Belize to come in to moderate the very short segment 2 of the program. Thank you all very much. Janine?
Thank you, Shalima of Trinidad. Thank you for being an excellent moderator as always. This is the second segment of the program to celebrate the 100th edition of our Zoom public meetings. So first, we'll be hearing from Ravin Ramsingh, who is the IT and marketing manager on our ICC team. He is a final year student in econometrics at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad. So Ravin, please go ahead and present your graphic.
Okay, thanks, Janine. So my name is Ravin, and I've been working for the ICC for the past coming up on 2 years now. And I make all the promotional material, all the posters, I edit the videos, post them on YouTube and Facebook. And I'm just here to give you a small update on how everything has been performing. Most of these services I've only been able to capture data over the past year. So this would have been from April 25th, that meeting last year, to now, right? So on the first graph that you're seeing right now, let me slide, yeah. So on the graph that you're seeing right now, this is our Zoom performance in terms of attendance over the past year, right? So this is every meeting we've done from April 25th, 2021 till now. And at first, when you look at it, it mightn't seem like the numbers are increasing all that much. Although it's a niche program, it might seem that the numbers are increasing all that much, but charts and tables don't always tell the full story. So if you look at the actual meetings, and I've calculated it, our average lows in terms of actual meeting attendance is 20% higher than it used to be a year ago. So what that tells me is that we're gaining loyal attendees. We're gaining people that are actually returning to the meetings every week, and every week we have new people. So we are gaining people that return to the meetings every week. The next slide here. So this is our performance on Facebook. And given the nature of our page, our cultural page that has Zoom meetings every week and we publish articles, this performance is, there's barely anything to compare it to, given the nature of our page. So it's hard to judge our performance, benchmark it. But as you can see, based on that graph, we have been holding steady. We haven't really been increasing based on how Facebook's algorithm works. A lot of these social media platforms, YouTube and Facebook primarily, they work based on algorithms, and their algorithms favor two things, money or controversy. And because we promote purely intellectual content, we're not going to be favored by the algorithm. So our numbers aren't going to increase organically. Right. So we've been looking into promoting, paying for more ads on the Facebook, which is primarily how a lot of companies get their stuff, get their pages to grow on Facebook. But our organic growth, in my opinion, is unprecedented. If you look at similar pages, cultural pages, at current, I believe we have about 1,000 likes on the page and 1,200 followers. And one of the following slides, I'll show you the reach of the page. But this is the demographics performance on one of our meetings. And this testifies to the reach as well, because if you look at the meeting, right? So this is the November 1st local government elections in South Africa. The number of people that attended that meeting from South Africa was incomparable to any other meeting that we've had before. We had 273 persons in the meeting, and about 170 of the persons were from South Africa alone, which tips me off that we have tremendous reach into demographics in various countries. But because of the, I wouldn't want to say lack of relevance, but the meetings aren't always targeted to specific groups in specific countries. But when they are, those people will attend. And the South Africa statistic, the majority of the persons that attended, there was another graph that I didn't put into the presentation, but the majority of those persons that attended were from KwaZulu-Natal, which was one of the major areas where things were happening. And the graph below that is just demographics. It shows you the average ages, it shows you the age ranges, and this meeting was 55% men, 45% women. So this is a more general meeting. This is one of our average meetings, right? Yes, I said it's our most viewed last meeting, but this is more representative of the average. So since we're based in Trinidad, our majority of viewers will be from Trinidad and Tobago. Secondarily, United States, Canada, India, United Kingdom, and that is normally the trend for a lot of meetings. But this is normally why we say good morning, good evening, and good night, because of the number of countries that our attendees are from, and you can see it here. But this, like I said, this is from the Facebook page. Right, so now this is from the YouTube channel, and somehow every time I check our YouTube channel, I check it almost every day. Every time I check it, I'm surprised, because the YouTube algorithm, in terms of how it promotes content, is a lot more vicious than Facebook. It's tremendously more difficult to do good on YouTube than on Facebook. And in the past 28 days, we've had 634 views on the channel. That might not seem like a lot if you look at other YouTube channels, but given the nature of our content again, our performance is unprecedented. 69.1 watch hours, given the average length of our meetings being an hour and 50 minutes long. 69 watch hours, meaning that people would sit and watch the entire meeting on YouTube. And this is our overall YouTube performance. So in the past 365 days, our posts have made impressions on people, meaning people have seen our posts on YouTube 104,000 times. And given that in the past 365 days, primarily what we posted are the meetings, it means that somehow the YouTube algorithm is actually promoting our meetings because more people are taking interest in it, more people are liking the videos, more people are viewing the videos, and that's really the only way to beat the algorithm, aside from paying YouTube and paying Google to promote your content. Right, so at current, I don't believe I included it. Our YouTube channel has a total of 70,000 views. That's all the views for all of the videos. And one more thing that I did not include in this is our current efforts to market the Zoom program via email. And so we've recently established a new system for sending out emails. Previously, the majority of you would have received your emails from one of Dr. Mahabir's personal accounts, but now you can look out for the emails coming from the website with Dr. Mahabir's name prefacing the email, dmahabir@Indo-Caribbean publications.com. The problem again that we encountered with that is that those emails are being categorized as social emails or promotional emails because of the fact that it's an invitation. So when you're checking your emails and you're looking for our invitations, you should note to check in your promotions tab if you're using Gmail or Outlook. Most emails at this point have a promotions tab. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ravin, for those very revealing and insightful graphics. Our next speaker is a director of the Zoom Indian Diaspora Project. He is Dr. Kumar Mahabir, who graduated with his PhD in anthropology from the University of Florida. He is the author of several books, book chapters, and articles in journals, magazines, and newspapers. He's also a full-time university lecturer. So Dr. Mahabir, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Janine. So Ravin, can you pull up my slides? I'm going to be very quick, but covering a wide area because I know we are past our time and people are eager to do other things. So Ravin, I sent you my PowerPoint, if you can open it. And Ravin is an amazing guy. You have just seen him. He is among, not the, but among the best in the world when it comes to IT marketing and so on. So we have a good, strong team, and we are going to get bigger and better with your support, all of you who are here. So, right, so this is my presentation. It's a momentous occasion, 100 episodes today. Next slide. So, yes, these are our collaborators, all right? So it's quite a tribute for us to be collaborating with international organizations, institutions like Warwick University, and Professor David Debidine has really been in the lead in making us exposed and connected to these wider institutions. We have South Africa, Selva Naidu, St. Vincent Grenadines. We have collaborated with Rajan Singh, Global Indian Series in UK, international. On Sunday coming, go back. On Sunday coming, we are going to partner with Manipal University in hosting this program. Neighboring Guyana, we have partnered with this organization here, Jaldin, right? But I would really like to call upon Professor David Debidine, whom my apology, I should have asked you to say something at the very beginning of the program. And a lot of credits to him for taking us where we are today. David, are you here? Can you unmute?
Yeah, I am.
Yes,
I
yes.
am Kumar.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Kumar. And I must just very briefly as well, I thank you and Bindu and Shalima and your team for this extraordinary success in putting 100 webinars every week. I mean, it's a really major achievement. I'd like to very briefly thank my team. First of all, my daughter, Surya Dabadi. She's only 12. She is my IT consultant. And my son Moses, who's 15. They know much more about computers than I do. Dr. Mira Khalidin and Professor Amar Wahab were editors of the Amina Gafur Journal of Indentureship, which comes out twice a year, open access. So it's free to be read by everybody. Dr. Lynn Macedo, who composes our bibliography, which is now the most comprehensive bibliography in the world on indentureship and its legacies. Arlen Harris, who's made about 18 short films for us so far. Eve Canram, who is our administrator and oversees the Amina Gafur website. There are 45 scholars and artists all over the world who are part of our academic advisory board. And of course, I always lean upon my friend, who is the co-founder of the Amina Gafur Institute, Dr. Roger van Zwannenberg, who's chair of the Pluto Educational Trust. And we, the Amina Gafur Institute, part of that trust. I wouldn't say anything about the Amina Gafur Institute. It's all on the website. But thank you, Kumar, for extraordinary achievement.
Thank you. I am glad that we have forged and established this.
It's as epic as the Kalapani, you know.
Yes, thank you.
Anyway, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, Ravin, next slide, because I'm going to go quickly. Wouldn't be more than so this is our budget. We have expenses every week, every month, every year. We have passed 2 years from today, and we have to pay costs. The graphic artist to design the posters is a new poster every time, to target individuals and groups depending on the topic of the week, to record the meeting, to edit, to upload it, and so on. And we have to pay writers. Ideally, we should have an article based on every program, but we have not lived up to that expectation really, but we have been doing okay. And we have internet costs. We have paid for extra bandwidth, Digicel. This is the TT dollars. We pay for a Zoom license, and on special occasion, we pay extra to increase our maximum capacity to 500. It's really 500 participants. And we have to pay to host our website and so on. So we, yeah, next slide. So we have expenses. I mean, even you use Zoom, you have to pay. So this is our team, a great team. Everybody here is beyond average intelligence. Everybody here is on top, world class. We have Shalima Mohammed here, who has been working a lot behind the scene. And Shalima has been appointed as co-host and a successor to this program. So this program has to live on. We have young, very, very young people like Nicholas, like Ravin, like Janine. That's a younger generation in the 20s. And they are going to take this program to the future. So we have Ravin, who I've spoken about, top of the line. Ashish, he is from India, resident in Trinidad. We have a newspaper, Indo-Caribbean.com, and he promotes our shows, the invitations and the recording. Judith from England, who is resident in Trinidad, she has a specialist role. Her role is to write for grants, apply for grants. That's all she does. She works almost full-time with us. And she has been successful because today we are supported by the Office of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And it's because of her application and so on, and the process of doing it, that we have been able to get that grant. Predi Partap, he is the manager. We have a website, Indo-Caribbean-publications.com, so we post a lot of our items here. And Nicholas, our youngest recruit, works with me almost full-time in the physical office, comes almost every day. He was here last night until 9 p.m. putting this presentation together. This PowerPoint that you're seeing, amazing guy, above intelligence and above average, sorry, He has graduated with a BSc in political science. In the next few months, he is going to graduate in law through the University of London. Amazing team, and we are going to go forward. We have the best of the best. Next slide. Right, so these are chairpersons and moderators. You know, we have recent ones, we have current ones, and I've tried at the very beginning to get a lot of people from Suriname, like Sadhana and Devika. Charlene was here, Kirti just spoke. So we have a great team to fall back on if anybody, for whatever reason, cannot make it on that day. We have a team to rely on. Next slide. So these are our sponsors. And you would think that we are making a lot of money, but it's not. Some people give as little as 50 US a one-time donation for the year. Maybe it's ever. That is good. We appreciate that because their expenses for the month, we have to pay 1,000 US in expenses, mainly salaries, 1,000 US. Each show costs us about 250 US to produce. So there are expenses. Some people, the moderators and so on, volunteer, but we have other expenses. David Devidine has been a tremendous guy, tremendous. I'm saying this in front of him, his face and behind his back. It is because of him that we have been able to sustain this program and take it from strength to strength. Sat Sukhdev is a friend. He joins regularly. Patricia Mohammed, so Boise Seal, amazing, amazing. Mark Ramdin, amazing. And people give, and we are grateful. I am not going to say how much they give, Dr. Sibani Roy, but we appreciate every penny that you send, especially if it's in pounds, David. Next slide. So these are our advisors, and they are all there, ideological. We had Beto Ram, who just presented. He is a scholar on the team. Brilliant guy. And Tara Singh was there. Dr. Sita wrote in there now. She is helping us in the recent weeks with the IT to make sure the trolls don't come in. They do mischief and they do all kinds of things. And Dave Sharman from Suriname, amazing. And a lot more people here who advise us. We have Kasraj, who's, I couldn't find a photo of him to add, but I saw him in the audience there. And then we have Mr. Jai Says, who is a Guyanese living in Grenada. Tremendous support, because why? This is a non-profit venture. People like our idea, our mission, our vision, and they're willing to support it. So I think that's the last slide. Ravin, is it? So we will, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahaber, for showing us who is behind the scenes every single Sunday night for these Zoom programs. And our last speaker is Ms. Shalima Mohammed, whom you already know. She's going to put the icing on the cake, so to speak, with the surprise presentation that will surely entice all of us. So Ms. Mohammed, you may go now.
Thank you so much, Janine. Let me just share my screen, please. Just 1 second. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for staying with us. Let me go back. What we want to announce is something that many of you have been calling for. And we finally decided that, yes, as of the next, from Program 101 moving forward, we are going to try as much as is possible to pull the team together in a more social atmosphere. So we are launching the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center Caribbean Line. So this year, please book on your calendar, August 4th to the 11th. And we are hoping that all of you will come down to Trinidad and Tobago to join us. What we intend to do, or the reason why we are doing this, we really want to continue the Indian tradition of family get-togethers. So this is now the ICC family, whether you are behind the scenes or joining us in the audience, advisors, whatever position you fill, you are part of the ICC family. And so, although we are not related by blood, our common history of indentureship brings us together. Even if it is that you're not from an indentured background, you are part of the Indian diaspora, we welcome you into the ICC family. And that because this is the home of the ICC, we really want you to come and visit with us and see what Trinidad and Tobago is about. So during that period, August 4th to the 11th, what will you do? Well, first of all, when you come in, we want to take you to a particular part of Trinidad and Tobago, Tunapuna, where we hope most of you will stay, and I'll explain why in a minute. But we hope for you to be able to explore that area. Then we will be driving down to Debe, which is in South Trinidad, which is where Bindu is from actually, and Bindu might be our tour guide. So we are going down there so that you can try, those of you who've never tried doubles before, you will get doubles galore, you will get all different kinds of mitai. Then on the way back up to Tunapuna, we will be stopping off in central Trinidad, which is where I am from. And here you'll be able to visit several sites, including the Indo-Caribbean Museum, one of a kind, the Hanuman Murti, again one of a kind, and the Temple in the Sea, all one of a kind, found here in Trinidad and Tobago. On the next day, Saturday, we want to take you in Central again, but in a different part of Central. So first of all, to the farmers market, where you can get fresh cane juice for breakfast. This is where a lot of the Indians in Trinidad and Tobago are concentrated. So we want to give you the experience of what it is like to be Indian in Trinidad and Tobago, some cultures, some of traditions, and so on. So we plan to visit the National Council for Indian Culture, that library there, which Dr. Samu is very instrumental in putting together. We will have lunch at Baraka Grounds, hopefully, and then you'll get to do some shopping at the Indian Expo, clothing, jewelry, skincare, whatever it is. And of course, we must pass for you to visit the Lion House, which is the actual house that is a house for Mr. Biswas. This is where Sir NAIPAUL would have lived. The next day, you're coming, by the way, during the period for HOSEIN. So what we want to do is have our regular Zoom program on Sunday. And before that program begins, we'll have a curry duck and cricket lime, hopefully. And all of these plans are tentative, by the way. HOSEIN is the one thing on the calendar that's planned, and I'll get to the other one very soon. So we should be able to participate in HOSEIN on Monday night. On Tuesday, Naima, who you would have heard from earlier, Naima Khan, Naima's estate is where we'll be visiting. You'll have an opportunity to spend some time in the pool. Naima has wonderful grounds, and you get to walk through the pine forest and then get a view from the Maracas area. Naima will tell you more about that later. On Thursday, which should be the final day, we expect that it will be Raksha Bandhan, and so this is an opportunity to really develop the brotherhood when each of us can exchange Rakis, I hope, before everyone leaves. And that, in a nutshell, is some of the things that we expect that you'll be doing when you come. Where will you stay? We have several options for you, and I'm only presenting two here. We're hoping that some of you will opt to stay at Morton House. This is a 141-year-old historical home of Reverend John Morton. Now, he's very important because he was a Presbyterian missionary from Canada who chose to come to Trinidad of his own accord. And when he came here and he saw the condition of the East Indians, he decided to do something about it. And this is really why we have a number of Presbyterians in Trinidad and Tobago, most because of him. So the home in which he lived has been converted into a guest house, and it's available for you to stay. So if you are into historical buildings and you don't mind the family atmosphere, you would choose Morton House. You also have the option to stay close by at the University Inn. What we're trying to do is to keep everyone as close together, and these locations are about 30 minutes away from the Piarco International Airport. So once you land, it's not far to get to wherever you want to stay, and we should be able to get together very quickly because of the close proximity. So we have further information for you. And anyone who would like to express interest in joining us, you can always contact us by filling out a form which will be made available to you. Dr. Mahabir, would you be able to put this in the chat? It is also available.
Not today, because I have to get the
Not
link
today.
from, yeah.
Okay, no problem. But for those of you who would want to take a picture with your phone, you can always type the link into your browser and you'll get access. So at this point in time, I will want to close, but what I want to say is, if you really want to come and join us, let's please make this a lovely social event. And when Professor Mistry was talking about Professor Brijlal, she's from South Africa, he's from Fiji. We have Dr. Brinsley Samaru here. We have several giants like them in the Caribbean, and they get together at conferences and have wonderful social events so that they know each other well. What we want to do is to try to expand that so that all of us can get together and we can chat and exchange ideas and develop this thing into a really close family unit and bond. So with that, I will close, and I hope to hear from you all very soon, expressing your interest in joining us on the ICC tours. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalima, for the presentation and revelation. I think it's very exciting news for everybody. I'll now hand over to the chairperson, Bindu Jakinath Maharaj, to take just a few questions and comments and close the program. And I guess she might want to make a few brief closing remarks as well. So Bindu, please take over.
Thank you very much, Janine Gilhari from Belize, everyone. Now, before I close off, obviously, and of course, I am going to ask if anybody would like to make any further comments or ask any questions based on what was just provided for you all by Shalima, by Dr. Mahabir. So if you have anything to add, ask, you can do so now. All right. Well, okay, Dr. Kanhai, Professor Kanhai, go ahead, ma'am. Your mic is off in case you're speaking.
Ravin, can you help her?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you now.
Yeah, if you could post somewhere maybe some information about any kind of restrictions or regulations for coming into Trinidad regarding, pandemic and COVID conditions.
Okay, great. Noted. Thank you. All right.
But we really hope all of you would come, because that Morton House, do you know it's as cheap as 20 US a person per night? You can't get it cheaper than that. And very good accommodation, clean, well kept. So you have to pay as you come, step by step. We are not taking any money. You buy a ticket for yourself, you pay for your own accommodation, you buy your own food. We will provide minimal, we will organize everything. Okay.
And when Dr. Mahabir said it's well put in place, he means, okay, AC, Wi-Fi,
yes,
and hot water, all right?
Yes.
And maintenance. So
Very
good.
good.
All right. So, well, given that there is nothing new to add from our audience members, on a personal note, I would just like to endorse the overall rationale for the ICC and the AGI collaborative and individual efforts. At the end of it all, guys, we are bounded by our common history and our ancestry of indentureship. We have deviated or gone in different directions based on religion, on marriage, on class, on jobs, on education, and all of these things. However, we are still bounded by our history, of which we can't deny. And as a diaspora, I will reference the AGI's title, which is for the study of indentureship and its legacies. And the diaspora is the legacy of indentureship. So in keeping that in mind, I want to thank everyone for sharing their Sundays with us here for the last 100 episodes, which is like, you know, as the young people will say, epic. It's epic, right? And we look forward to sharing another 100 episodes and keep building it year after year and just growing, expanding, and evolving with your continued support and presence. Thank you all very much. I would like to close now. And as I would have said and has been mentioned, this has been a joint effort with the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center and the Amina Gafu Institute for the study of indentureship and its legacies, led by Professor David Dabadine. Also, new addition to this part of our Read Up on a Sunday, this program is also being supported by the Sport and Culture Fund of the Office of the Prime Minister of the Government of Trinidad and Tobago. Our topic next Sunday will be on history, memory, and indentureship, which will be hosted in partnership with the Manipal University in Jaipur, India. So please like, share, and follow our Facebook page. Also, go to YouTube. Although it was cast live, it was streamed live, it's still there. So you can see it on YouTube as well. I am Bindu Deokinath Maharaj from Trinidad and Tobago, saying goodbye. May God bless you all, keep you safe and healthy. Dhanyavad.